Welcome again. Welcome to Shadow School Day 10, Episode 10. Obviously, we're focusing on the 10th gene key, a shadow of self-obsession, the gift of naturalness, and the Siddhi, the divine gift of being. This one is juicy, so go grab your popcorn, your coffee, your tea, whatever you need, your notebook. This is a really good one. We're going to dive straight in. And I'm going to share my own story throughout as much as it naturally wants to come through. I don't have anything prepared ahead of time, but I really see myself in this gene key today. And so I'm hoping even just the little snippets that I share can help you also perhaps see an aspect of yourself in this particular gene key and the process outlined by this gene key. And it's one of self-discovery, it's one of self-love, it's one of self-obsession and seeking and doing our inner work to discover our true self, to become individuated, and ultimately to release that then. And this is definitely a really juicy one. So let's get in here. Let's get in here. So we start in the shadow of self-obsession. And here we find that something triggers us to begin asking questions about ourselves. Who am I? What am I here to do? What is all of this about? What is my role in this world, in this life? And that sets us off on this journey. But before we get to that journey, we might just be living a life where we are kind of just turned inward and we're focused on our own self preservation as our programming has been designed, frankly, as the conditioning of our society has driven us to be individualized, which is slightly different than individuation, which we'll talk about later. Individualized, meaning that we're really just focused on ourselves, our own needs. This is like super self-preservation, super survival focused. And before we get to that questioning that has us go off seeking and searching into our own hero or heroine's journey, we're just bopping around and we are living in a state of being, but the beingness is not connected to something else. It's very much rooted in our own individual experience, in this particular body, in this illusion of the reality that we've created with our minds. And we're bopping around, but bumping up against other humans, but really we can't really focus on them. It's all very much inward. There is a bit of narcissism here at play, but really this is how we develop as humans. This is what a lot of our development stages go through as children, and we are naturally and wired to be self-oriented in a large part. But what happens as we move into adulthood and that self-preservation, that self-focus of development and getting our needs met is no longer quite as necessary. Many of us never really grow out of that. And that's where we're talking about here in the shadow. This is where we begin in the shadow of self obsession. Here, we can only see ourselves. And we are really obsessed with being different and unique and having a sense of security, a sense of stability that we've created. It's it's a false one, but we create and we craft this sense of stability and security around our identity. And that means we attach to aspects of our identity, the roles that we have in life, the labels, the boxes that we fit ourselves into. And we really hunker down, we attach, we grasp onto, we cling onto these labels and attachments as a way to carve out our space in this existence and almost create like a buffer that is a separation, like this is me. This is me. Here I am. And what it does is it has us stick there. It has us cling to those identities, labels, attachments, roles, and it keeps us from changing. And we know evolution is the natural agenda. It is the agenda of the oneness, of beingness, of nature for evolution. And so we're kind of pushing against evolution when we try to carve out this stable, clear, identifiable, discernible identity we can attach ourselves with and pour ourselves into and pour our lives into reinforcing that sense of identity into the world. And we have a huge fear here that we will lose this identity. Teddy bear. Stop. Goodness. What's interesting is that the path out of this means that we do actually need to go on a journey to discover our identity. But what I'm talking about here is our true nature, our true identity. And what we find a lot in this shadow of self-obsession and the false stability, the identity that we've created and carved out for ourselves, is that that actually is usually built on a lot of conditioning. It's usually not our true self that we've shaped and created this bubble around in the world that we're claiming to be. It's not our true self. It's really difficult when we're living in this bubble that we've created, the this is me self-obsession bubble, to relate to other humans because we are so focused on ourselves and establishing ourselves and us being seen a certain way. You know, this is a really good example of like whenever we're in a social situation and we're worried what everyone else is thinking about us, we're all focused on our own stuff. That's the example of this bubble. Like we're only ever just like worried about how we are being perceived. We're not even thinking about the other person and how we're perceiving them or how we're interacting with them. It's mostly always just self-inward focused. That's an example of how this comes to life. And when that happens so much throughout our whole lives, and that's how we think we are and how we think things are, we also think everybody else is thinking about us the whole time, by the way, which is crazy because we're so self-obsessed. But what we do is we lose touch with other people. We lose touch with the feelings of other people. And we are unable to see the uniqueness of others, which is such an interesting irony because really what we're trying to do is establish our uniqueness so much and see how different and unique and lovely and beautiful and amazing we are and establish that bubble and discern that in the world and stand for that for ourselves, that we neglect to, and we almost lose the ability to understand that others also have that. And so we have this like self-obsession that rises, that shows us, and through our patterns and the mind reinforcing with a whole host of reasons, as it will come in and do. It'll come to our aid in our shadows at any time. It's really good at that. It's a friend to the shadow. Here, it's a friend to our self-obsession, and it's telling us like, you're better, your ideas are better, other people don't know what they're doing. I don't understand why people don't see the world the way that I do. In fact, at this point, you don't understand that people do see the world differently than you. You believe that the only way to see the world is how you see it. And only that reality exists. And there is a sort of denying of the reality of others. There is a denial of the uniqueness of others, the opinions of others. And there is a huge amount of criticism, judgment, and attachment to wanting others to change. When we look at others from this perspective, from this spot of self-obsession, all we see in others is the things that we think they should change, things that we wish were different about them. And oftentimes, these things are rooted in our own self-identity that we've constructed. If we're an introvert, we have no tolerance for people that aren't introverted. If we're an extrovert, same. Like, I don't think either of those things exist personally, but that's an example of one of the things that we attach to, one of the labels, introvert, extrovert. That one happens a lot. And we have no tolerance for the other way of showing up, for any way outside of our identified way of showing up. And therefore, we want all these people to change. And we find it really hard to accept others for the uniqueness. This is something I can really identify with. Probably about 10 years ago, I was trying to think before I started this live, when did I start to work with the Enneagram? Because before that, I was definitely on a development path, on a growth path. I was evolving in my 20s, but that looked like me changing how I showed up at work, me working on professional development. It wasn't quite like formally like a personal development thing. I didn't even like consider this concept of personal growth yet. I was really focused on how do I succeed at work? And so these external factors were really driving how do I need to change this or that, or this mechanistic approach to getting feedback and implementing it so that I could get more money, be a better leader, whatever it was, right? It was all about the things I wanted to have. I didn't yet recognize it was all about a sense of beingness and understanding myself and growth yet. When I first got introduced to the Enneagram and I took the assessment, I received a pretty dominant score in one type and some higher scores in other types, but it's very obvious that I had received the type of Enneagram 8, which is active controller, challenger, protector, and I have the savior. And really the underlying motivation there is about having power and not allowing others to have power over oneself. And I was like, okay, that's a cool type. Like, yeah, I really do like to have control and like take charge, and I'm a decision maker and I, move things forward and all of that. But I remember there being a lot of aspects of the profile that were very triggering to me at the moment. And so the reason why I share this story is because the Enneagram itself and receiving that report was one of the very first agitators that set me off on this journey of who am I? I don't think that I had consciously been asking those questions before. Before I had been, what do I want? Who do I want to be? And how do I create that in the world based on the other examples I see? And now faced with this Enneagram, it gave me an opportunity to start to look in the mirror at some great qualities that I had created in this projection of myself. But also I was very confronted by some of these qualities that were not so desirable. And in fact, I share this a lot in my first podcast episode. You can find that at the Higher Self Leadership podcast on Apple, Spotify, on my own Muse and Method Substack. What I noticed is that I was not getting the things that I wanted. That projected version of myself wanted to be seen as a leader, for example. And I discuss this in this podcast episode because I talk a lot about the art of contemplation. And I use this specific example and go into much greater detail than I will on this show around how I worked with this concept using mental, emotional, and physical contemplation. So I highly recommend if you want to dive deeper into this and how I started to do the work and recognize the work and actually start to change aspects of myself that were no longer serving me, that were patterns I had picked up along the way for protection, please go listen to that episode. I will try to remember to come back and like post a link or promote it somewhere again so that everyone can grasp onto that easily. What I found is I started to have like this mechanistic approach to the things that I thought were wrong about me that I wanted to fix. And that's where I started. And that's where I see a lot of people begin their personal journey here. And it doesn't necessarily start, I don't think, with a who am I? Who am I feels very much like a lovely searching approach to me. What I feel like is more common and what happens is our entire world or our snow globe is totally shaken. And we're like, oh my God, I don't know what's happening here at all. And I have to grasp onto something. And we go on a journey. Some aspect of our lives is disrupted, or we have some type of breakdown or breakthrough. But oftentimes I think we get confronted with just something that we want to fix about ourselves because we're still thinking self-obsession, right? We're still in this bubble and we're like, I want to get this thing. This particular issue is what's between me and getting this thing. So I need to fix this issue about myself. Absolutely no self-love in that at all, by the way. No compassion, no grace, no No holding space for that part of you. It's really just like, how do I tinker with this and fix it? And that's where I began this journey. But it easily started to snowball over time because it really sucked me into a continual path of diving deeper, experimentation, working with aspects of myself. And only there did it really start to open up the doors to be a more spiritual exploration. Before that, I was pretty atheistic in my tendencies and very mechanistic, mind focused on how I approached myself and the world and even my own personal growth. And the fact I used to describe myself as just a floating head. Like if I could get rid of this body is such a nuisance. If I could just be a floating head bobbing around, then I would have a much happier existence. And I think that does describe a lot of us in this world. We're not embodied. We're not fully tapping into the amazing opportunity and blessing that we have in these bodies and in this human experience to really connect back into a greater sense of spirit and development. And that is what we're finding in this 10th gene key. And I've segued us a little bit to share some of my personal journey, but I'm going to steer us back now into more about self obsession. When we start to go down this path of questioning, and it may be, who am I in this existential crisis? Or it may be, I don't like this part of myself. I want my identity to be X. And we start to tinker and experiment. But what we're doing there is we're starting to seek. We're trying to understand parts of ourselves. We're trying to shift. We're trying to change. Some of it is very effort and force focused. Some of it's a little bit flowier and being drawn into focused. And both of those have a place in personal growth. But when we do that, we start to then cling on to new ways of being inside of this same kind of bubble. So we're like, okay, I don't want to show up as blunt as I was before. So I'll work on and change this one part of myself, practice that a little bit. And now I'm a little bit softer in my interactions with people. Great. Now I'm a person who can be soft in my interactions with people. Not only am I this amazing challenger leader, but I can also hold space for others and listen really well. Now I'm super identified with that as how I show up. And so it's like every little step that we make toward dissolving, we end up creating a new set of identity facets to hold on to. And there is some pathology here around having to have something to grab onto, having to be able to define ourselves. There is some safety there, some false illusion of stability. That's really what's at the core of this. And there is a need, there's like a perpetual desire to figure out, to seek and to search every tiny little hair on the head of your being in terms of knowing exactly who you are so that you can easily share it out into the world and others know exactly who you are, because that's also what you want. You really want others to know exactly who you are according to your definition. This figuring it out is one of the things that our mind does for us. And it has us believe that that's what we need to do. That's the work we need to do. We need to pursue at all costs a sense of knowledge, knowing, seeing, and certainty around being a certain way in life, in this example. And we have to figure out who we are. We're going to talk about a little bit of a different option here. But what happens is we go on this quest to find ourselves, to figure out who we are. But the thing is that we can easily get caught in this trap. We get addicted to that searching. See, the thing on the other side of it, the naturalness and the being, the gift and the city that we'll get to in a second, actually show us that we've got to soften and dissolve around having these rigid identities that we want to attach to. The seeking is the path for sure. But if we get stuck in the seeking and we never move beyond it, and let me tell you, this is a really easy place to get stuck in, because the second that you grasp onto an identity, It's like it's ephemeral. The more we grasp, the more we seek, the harder it becomes to find and figure out. And sometimes, if we're really stuck in the mind and we're really good problem solvers and we're really good strategists and we're really good at getting things done and figuring things out and making things happen in our lives, we will double down and we will sink even further into this trap, and we become addicted to finding out who we are and defining that in the world. And we can get stuck there for years and years and years. So we've got to recognize here when we are falling into the mirror, into the looking glass, and we're stuck in this pattern of constant searching and seeking that just keeps us there, just keeps our wheels turning. It's perpetual if we allow it to be. We have to, through this process, come to a point where we spontaneously realize and recognize that what we are seeking cannot be found. And I can say that here for you, what you are seeking in terms of your identity and defining yourself in the world as an individual being cannot be found. It cannot be defined. It cannot be measured. And I can share that with you and repeat it over and over and over. You can watch me saying that over and over and over again. But until you come to the spontaneous recognition of this on your own, you will be stuck in this perpetual cycle of searching, seeking, and trying to define. Hi, Shannon. So here we have, again, repressive and a reactive expression state for the shadow. In the repressive state, this is more introverted. The energy is pulled inward from the outside of our life in. And here we have this aspect called self-denying. And if we're in the shadow of self-obsession, where we're focused on our seeking and our understanding ourselves and attaching to identities, in this state, we're actually denying that entire process altogether. So we're not even taking the first step to dive off the diving board into the pool of seeking and searching and answering the question of who am I? Instead, our fear is actually holding us back from even approaching that process at all. I'm sure that you can think of a lot of people perhaps that you've seen or you've interacted with, or maybe even you're experiencing this, where there is a denial of self that happens. The entire life is lived for others. And it doesn't even occur that you want to understand yourself or look to yourself or know who you are. There is kind of a hollowness there that exists. There's a full compromise of our life as we live for others instead of doing our own work and being our natural, purposeful selves. There is a martyrdom that happens here. And as a result, what happens is people here have no sense of greater purpose. And by greater purpose, again, I always want to anchor us back to how the Gene Keys describes purpose, which is you in your fullest, naturalist state of being, sharing your unique combination of gifts with the world, bringing that unique quality and essence through everything that you do and be. It's not something outside of you. But here, if we can't understand what those gifts are and we never go on the journey at all, then we have no real true center. We have no real anchor. We have no North Star. We have no sense of inner purpose and anything to align to. And so we're a little untethered here. And you can see how it's easy to then begin to live your lives for others. And if we're terrified on going on this journey to discover who we are, we'll do anything at all costs to continue to serve and give out our energy and pour our energy into the lives of others. And this can happen to us, I think, because of fear. This can also happen to us because of circumstance, too. There are a lot of caregivers out there, a lot of parents out there that don't have the time or space. They haven't been able to create or cultivate or carve out any time or space for themselves to actually go on this journey. And so it's like not necessarily that they're fearing the journey, that's holding them back, but there's almost like there is no pause, there is no space there. It's almost like the journey has been put on pause. So they're in kind of a stasis here. And what happens is there's no real ability to have self-love in this part. You're kind of ambivalent. You're probably really judgy about yourself, probably always judging why you can't be doing more and having more for others. You might have an underlying sense of frustration and unfulfillment in your life, but you're very unclear about why that is and where it's coming from. because you're doing everything you think you should do in order to serve others. You're doing everything that you probably think you should do in order to have the life that you've been told that you could have by society. And the other thing that I want to say that's really important here is that until we go on the journey to actually get in touch with our natural whole self, we struggle to recognize that there is actually divinity within us. This is what we see in a lot of religion or any power structure in general, is that when we live in this self-denying state of this fear of self-obsession, this is where we really easily give away our authority to others because we don't see the power, we don't see the divinity, we don't see this eminence in ourselves. And so we just see it in other people then, and we give it to them and we allow them to go with it. So it's a really fascinating part of this. Then we get to the reactive expression of this shadow. The reactive expression of the shadow of self-obsession is narcissistic. Reactive expression, again, is when the energy is pushed outward. This is really more extroverted in nature. This is where we have a lot of venting of anger and frustration. And this energy that's pinned up has to go somewhere. So it goes out of us, it gets projected outward. In this narcissistic expression, we deny the existence and the uniqueness of others. It is 100% our world. And that is the only world that exists. Everyone else is just living in it. And man, do they have some things to go to work on. We have a fear here really then of losing this identity because we have constructed our whole life around this beautiful bubble that is us and how we see things and our opinions and our ideals and our truths and our version of reality. We are therefore terrified secretly that others will be able to come and take that away from us. This amazing world and reality we've cultivated for ourselves that is based on our own views and our identity. And as a result, we fear losing the identity, and we also fear this freedom being taken away. Like someone's going to come and rob you of your power, your choices, your freedom, or that identity that you've created. And as a result, you are in love with yourself. Like you're really obsessed with yourself. Relationships are really difficult. There's like no space for anybody else in a relationship with you. And you think that you are just the God's gift to the world. Like you are so amazing. I'm not sure what everybody else's problem is, but really there are a lot of cracks in that armor because what you're in love with, what your love affair with, what your obsession with is actually not the true you. It's this conditioned, projected, false self. It's this illusion of self that you have crafted, cultivated, constructed an entire elaborate reality and set of patterns and protections around. And that's where we live in this narcissistic state. And in order to move out of that, we actually have to drop this illusion that we have created and constructed for ourselves, this illusional self that is a giant delusion. It's not you. But in order to actually experience self-love and love others and to receive love from others, we have to drop the elusive identity that we've created, that illusion that we've created, that projection, because only when we're actually receiving love as our whole true selves can we actually feel it and receive it. Can we actually emanate it and find it and generate it inside and therefore reflect it onto other people that we're in relationship with. So that feeling of love is really only possible if we drop the illusion that we've created of this false sense of self. This brings us into the gift of naturalness, which is quite stunning. It's where we find that to be natural is to be yourself. Now, we have a lot of advice out there that is like, just be yourself, be authentic. And what I usually see is people that are like, this is just the way I am as a response and all of that stuff. That's not the same thing. Authenticity, like happiness, like gratitude, like any of these things is an ongoing practice. It's constantly morphing and growing with you. It is not a set solid version of you that's actually rooted in this shadow we just explored of self-obsession, where you get to say, I'm just going to be the real me and show up. And if people don't like it, that's on them. Like that type of language, if you ever hear yourself saying that out loud or inside to yourself, that's a very justified, projected version. That's a false you at play there that is kind of creating this boundary of like, I'm just going to show up this way and everybody else be damned. That's not reasonable here in this gift of naturalness. In the gift of naturalness, when we talk about being yourself, we are talking about being the clear, pure, core self that you came here to be before all of the layers of conditioning were added, before all of the traumatic experiences in your life. And when I say traumatic experiences, there may be some capital T trauma, but there's always for everyone experiences that we have where we do not feel equipped to handle them. Something is happening too much, too big, too fast. And our interpretation of that situation is what happens. We internalize that as a traumatic experience. So we can have traumatic experiences all day if we're confronted by something that we don't feel equipped or ready to handle, and yet the experience is happening around us and with us. So I'm talking about that level of trauma as well. What happens is we start to build all these protection mechanisms and coping mechanisms and numbing. We dissociate from our bodies. We project out new versions of ourselves that we deem to be acceptable. And this is where we split off and hide away parts of ourselves into our shadow states. We suppress parts of our inner child. All of this happens throughout this development period of our childhood. And as a result, what can happen is we get further and further and further away from the actual core true essence of who we naturally are as a result. If you want to tap back into that, one easy thing to actually reflect on is, what did you love to do as a child? How did you love to be as a child? Where did you love to go? Who did you love to hang out with? What were the things that you created? What brought you joy? What was fun and playful? Reminding yourself what those things were can actually like tap back into and trigger into some of these expressions of you that were very natural before you put on a way that you had to be in order to get something in your life. Before you thought that you had to put on a certain suit in order to achieve a certain goal that was external to you. You were just simply being. You are naturally showing up in your natural state. That's what we're talking about here in the gift of naturalness. That's what we're talking about here when we're talking about being yourself. It's that self. It's that core underlying self. Now, why we actually dive into shadow school in the first place, why are we contemplating any of these shadows, gifts, and cities, is because all of us are carrying around layers of conditioning, layers of protection, layers of not self, layers of division and separation, layers of armor that we have built over our hearts, our energies, everything that have actually kept us from experiencing true love and connection with ourselves and with others. That is why we're doing this overall, this whole series of Shadow School. But here we really get to like what's underneath of all of that, your natural sense of being. Think about this. Before humans developed the neocortex, we were just running around surviving, absolutely. So we were driven a lot by instinct. We were also just very natural in our beingness. There was no there was no identity that you had to go become. You didn't have to go get a university degree and achieve this great job over here. Nobody was questioning their role of being a mother and how that affected their identity. Like we were just living. Now think about like animals, like my dogs. My dogs are not worried about how others see them. They're just being in their natural state. That is what we're getting to here in this gift of naturalness. When we've been conditioned to something other than who we are, and we begin to start to ask the question, thank you, neocortex, for coming into our life. who am I? That's why we ask this question, is because we have this neocortex now. When we start to ask that question, it starts to allow us to examine all those layers that exist between our perceived illusion of the identity that we've created and we've been projecting for years, and the actual natural, full, easy, complete, whole, beautiful, unique self that's kind of, it's like underneath here. And we just need to peel back these layers. That's what the journey of who am I sends us on. It sends us to examine each one of these layers, do what we will. Sometimes it takes layer and layer to peel off a single pattern. Sometimes it takes years to dig up a certain aspect of the natural us that we've been suppressing and to welcome it back into the fold. That's the actual work here, and it's quite beautiful. We go on this journey, this heroine's or hero's journey, to actually do that work. What happens is we can either get stuck in that seeking, like we talked about with the shadow. An alternative, though, is that we go on a journey of catch and release. That's a term I've created for what my own experience has been throughout this process. And what I mean by catch and release is we catch a part of our identity, an aspect of how we want to be seen in the world. And this can still be like very ego driven. Like you still want to be seen a certain way, right? There still is that impulse in there, and that's okay. We catch on to it enough to work with it. And we may even identify with it for a while. An example here is, for the longest time, I really struggled. I wanted to be seen as being an artist in the world. Not an artist that was painting and got paid for their work, but someone who literally was just like an artist in their life, in the work I was creating through the companies I worked for. But also, I did a lot of fiber art. I actually did create knitting and weaving and crocheting, and I would all manners of fiber art. And I wanted others to see me this way. There was this yearning inside to be seen as this creative force that could just build something from nothing. And so I had this very ego-driven need to be seen as an artist. But there was some big protection around not being seen. And I don't know, who am I to say that I'm an artist? And doesn't somebody else need to kind of give me that label? And I couldn't, I also at the same time, I wanted it desperately and I couldn't attach to it myself until I recognized, like, oh, there is no authority to give me this label. Like, I just actually have to be that. I can't wait for others to recognize me as that. I have to be it in order to do it. I just have to recognize myself as it. And the second that I did that, I caught onto, I did a catch. I caught the identity of artist. And I used that. I had it in my Instagram bio or my LinkedIn or my Twitter or whatever I was using at the moment. And it became a part of how I showed up and who I was for a period of time. But the more I started to use it, the more I realized like I didn't need to. It was just a natural part of my beingness, this creativity, this art that I would bring, this ability to create something from nothing. That was actually just a natural way of how I showed up to everything. That didn't mean I had to be an artist or to show up or to be seen as an artist. And so there was a process of dissolving there, the need for that identity and that label. And so that's what I'm talking about when we get to the release. We catch, we work with, we embody, and we release an aspect of our identity. This is, my friends, how we do not get trapped into the attachment, how we do not get trapped into the further seeking of a specific identity so that we create this like false self over here. I could have stuck myself in that bubble of being an artist for years and years and years and years. Instead, what happens afterwards is if you can release that, then you're on to the next. You're on to the next aspect of identity to explore. You're pulling up other gifts that you realize were sitting there dormant all along. You're catching, you're working with them. You're just integrating them now into your beingness. They become a natural part of you. And therefore, you don't have to have others see that of you. There is no need to project it outward. There is no need to prove that you are the thing because You are the thing. And then you release it. That's where we get into this naturalness. There is no need to show, there is no need to prove. You just simply are these things. You embody these things. You recognize them inside of yourself. And also, you recognize that they're not important. As much as they once were so important in your life to you and your sense of identity, the more you be them, the less they become important to be seen that way and to be projected that way. What I think is really fascinating is the Gene Keys offers this paradox, and I'm going to read it, and it's a little bit hard to grasp, but I'm hoping that the example I have just given helps you understand the sentence a little bit more and take it in a little bit more with this like a real concept now. We have to realize that we cannot be who we are at our natural state as long as we think we are someone, an artist, whatever. But we still have to set off and search for this someone in order to realize they do not exist. The process of getting to the other side, where we don't require an identity to be attached to, and we can show up as our natural self in a state of being, in a state of presence in any moment, requires that we do go on the journey of seeking. But the caveat is that we have to recognize that what we are seeking is not there. We still have to go on the journey, though. We still have to turn over every rock and find something underneath that we can work with for a bit, we can play with, we can experiment, but then we just let it go. We don't have to hold on to it because remember, we are in a constant state of emergence and evolution. That's what we're here for. We're not here to find a static state to grasp onto and then to never change again. That keeps us stuck in the shadow. So when we start to recognize this fact that what we're seeking isn't there and we can catch, but we need to release aspects of our identity and not actually identify with them and not create this illusion around them that we project out, then we release so much tension and so much energy that previously went toward defining and answering the question, who am I? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at the end. There is no one answer. There is no definable answer because it's freaking infinite and expansive, okay? So here we recognize we cannot be defined by any label. I see when I look around the world right now, people desperately trying to be defined by every label that they can grasp onto. And what I see is a lot of people catching, and that's beautiful. In order for us to get to this other side of naturalness, of embodiment, we do have to catch the identity. We have to go on the path of seeking. We have to identify with our genders, our sexual orientations, our races, our roles in life, our jobs, our desire to be an artist, our hair color, our everything, right? The character aspects of being an introvert, all these things, we need to attach to them for a second. We need to catch them so that we can work with them and decide, are these things really us or not? Are these things natural to us? Is this actually my core self? Is this really me being forth? Do I need to assert this in the world? Do I need others to see me this way? Or can I release this because I recognize myself in this identity, in this label? And what I do see is that a lot of people are getting really attached to all of these labels now. And that is the shadow of self-obsession at play in our society. And not only is everybody getting attached to labels, but everyone is demanding from everyone else that we all keep track of and file folder away exactly how to address everyone. But the work here isn't that. The work here is that we are rooted in our own identity that is always morphing and changing. and isn't labelable. We need to transcend the labels. But first, we have to go through this period where we're labeling everything, unfortunately. This is like where we are right now. But when we stop trying to do that, there's a huge release of energy. We stop trying to define ourselves. We recognize that we are much bigger than anything that we could define as humans. And a huge amount of creative, playful energy is freed up into the world. And there is a huge amount of inner spaciousness that is created and a feeling of freedom and sovereignty that is achieved that we currently do not have if we are trying to assert a certain identity out into the world. When we assert a certain identity and request and demand that others also recognize that identity that we've asserted, we are giving away our sovereignty. I just like that's a real concept to contemplate there. That is a real concept to contemplate. So we go on this journey of individuation, which is what Jung called it. We can get really addicted in here, but the purpose is that we have this flowering where all of our true natural gifts and essence actually blossom out. We don't get stuck in the perpetual seeking and the attachment to new identities that come through. Ooh, this is really great when I'm going to stick here for a while. We might, but let's keep moving, please. And we find that we're always emerging. And when we're here, we have this natural, joyous state that emerges. So then what kind of evolves out of that is the Siddhi, the divine gift of being. And this is when we can return to the place we were before we asked the question, who am I? And I don't mean return to the conditioned version of ourselves with that before we ask that question. I mean return to that very natural state that we entered with before we had to answer this question. So here, our differentiated self that we've just explored and examined and allowed to blossom into life dissolves. And we recognize there is no more need for evolution, that we are simply being, because there is no evolution in consciousness itself is simply being. It's a force of being, and it is everything. So there's nothing for it to evolve to or from. There is no place to go. There is no place to go away from. We simply are. And this is where we have the level of not who am I, but I am. And nothing has to come after that. I am an artist. I am a doctor. I am a mother. Those don't have to exist in being. In being, all we are is I am. And so if you want to work with this Siddhic state, that is the mantra to contemplate, the I am presence. And that there are kind of these two states of human on our path to the full state of being. It's being and becoming, and we kind of cycle between these two things. That's what we're doing in this gift of naturalness. Until ultimately there is no more becoming that has to happen, and there's simply just periods of being. There's all being. Nothing to do. There is no future to create. There's no one to do these things to create the future. There is no agenda. Because here in this level, we finally start to recognize that all of the illusion that we see in this projected mind reality of ours does not exist. It's all a game. It's all an illusion. It all gets reduced to that. And so even the seeking is part of the game. The identities are part of the game. The becoming is the game. The self-obsession is the game. It's all this matrix that's created through the projections of our mind, through our neocortex in our mind. And in the state of beingness, we can see this game we've constructed, but we can also see beyond it to what actually is, which is the beingness of everything, all consciousness. And so then here we have a very playful humor about life itself. Because when we're not trapped in trying to do things or make things happen or be seen a certain way, and we are simply being and recognizing this extraordinary game that we've constructed that we get to play in, maintaining that it is a game while we are playing in it, we can be in a place of neutrality in our lives. We can emanate love from this place of neutrality. We can choose love over fear, connection over separation. Hi, Tali. And here is where we have that state of being, that I am, is really, really beautiful. And this is where a lot of the work from A Course in Miracles, if you do that workbook, it has you start to deconstruct, my goddess, has you start to deconstruct the illusion that your mind has created as the reality, so that then you can recognize this beingness, this actual state of consciousness that is behind everything, that we're going around on a day-to-day basis and we're not actually seeing the world as it is. We're seeing it as we've created it. So that's another bookmark if you want to do some real diving in the future too. Go beyond the gene keys and start working with A Course in Miracles. I think I'm on like day 40 or 41 of that right now. And let me tell you, that's something to contemplate. So I'm going to leave you with this. Where in your life are you feeling attached to a certain aspect of your identity, a certain role, a label that you've given yourself, a title? How is that attachment holding you in place there and not allowing you to evolve? Yeah, Course in Miracles is freaking awesome. Where in your life are you projecting onto others that they should change because you're seeing the world a certain way? Where in your life are you stuck in perpetual seeking and searching to find the version of you that you could finally grasp onto and then rest? Rest after that? Where have you gone on your path of searching and seeking and you've caught onto a new version of an identity and it's time for you to release it, catch and release, so that you can allow it to dissolve and become an embodied part of you. You don't have to get stuck there in that trap. And where can you create space for yourself to recognize that none of these aspects of identity that we are so stuck on in this life actually exist? They don't need to exist. How can you bring forth your natural state of beingness on a daily basis? What practices can you put in place? That's what I'm going to leave you with today. If you're interested, I just opened enrollment for my very first program that I'm launching, which is really exciting to me. I just yesterday posted links that you can go and sign up on Instagram. It's like such an edge for me to put something like this out into the world. I haven't done it before in this way. The program is called Beautiful Boundaries, and it is really all about how to find energetic sovereignty and to set energetic boundaries that actually invite others into intimacy and connection and helping you do your own work, as opposed to projecting the work out onto others, asking others to change. That's what we're kind of talking about in the shadow of self-obsession today. Noticing that every trigger, every conflict is an opportunity for you to work on your own life curriculum. Every relationship you have in life is a direct mirror that provides you opportunities for growth and learning. And so we don't want to avoid these things. We don't want to push them off to the side and create big walls so that we can stay in a comfort zone. We actually want to run toward them. We want to run toward our triggers. We want to run toward our conflicts. We want to sit in them in comfort and actually do that work. And so if you're interested in doing that, I'm hosting a 6-week immersive program for women, for rising female leaders who really want to know how to have energetic sovereignty and boundaries while creating connection with others instead of building walls. We're going to contemplate the purpose sphere and your gene key, your specific one, and bring that to life and how that impacts and how you show up in all of your relationships as a result. We're really going to dive into thinking about all of the beliefs that you have built up over the years around trust, around boundaries, around protecting yourself, around safety and sovereignty, around conflict. What have you learned that's no longer serving you? And we are going to just completely leapfrog over all of the common popular advice around boundaries that has you staying stuck in a victim mindset around other people are toxic. I need to protect myself, yada, yada, yada. No, babe, we're going to take all the responsibility here in beautiful boundaries. And you're going to leave being a totally sovereign human that has the ability to communicate with love and pull others closer instead of pushing them further away. So if you want to join me for that, I've got the link up here on the LinkedIn Live and YouTube, but on Instagram, you can find the link in my bio to enroll. The first 5 women that sign up. We're starting on April 5th. By the way, that's the first call. The first 5 women that sign up get 50% off. It's already priced. It's such an extraordinarily accessible rate. This is a huge deal. I want to make everything that I do like this really accessible for everyone. I think there are a lot of programs that exist out there that are unreachable for many people. And I am also offering like a no questions asked, pay whatever you want option too, because I know we're going through a lot of turmoil right now. And a lot of people are losing their jobs, and the world is changing a lot of circumstances. And we need so much right now work like this that brings us together instead of pushes people away. So I want it to be accessible. Women, please sign up. I love you so much. Until then, I will see you tomorrow for another episode of Shadow School. Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining. Hi, Colby. Sending you all so much love. I hope you have an amazing weekend. Right now it's Friday. If you're watching this today with me live, hope you have an amazing weekend. I'll talk to you all tomorrow. Bye.